I've only tried a couple of TWS earphones so far, but in the past year or so, it looks like as a product category, it's really starting to mature. I've had my eyes on a number of different pairs for a while now, waiting to see a good deal before I pick them up. Now, one of those is the Anker Soundcore Liberty 2 Pro, which I have here, and when Anker reached out to me to see if I was interested in reviewing them, I of course said yes. Many of you might be familiar with Anker for their USB cables, their chargers, and their portable battery packs. I own several of those myself, and I know that there's a certain amount of quality expectation when it comes to Anker's products. But what can they do with earphones? Well, let's get into it. Hey guys, this is Noel and this is Wheezy Reviews, and each week I take a look at something audio related and let you know what I think, so if you're into that kind of thing, then make sure you subscribe. As I mentioned in the intro, Anker did send these over to me for my honest review, and as always, whether I purchase something myself or I get sent a review unit, I'm always going to give you my honest take on them. Now, with the whole global crisis going on at the moment, I haven't had that much opportunity to use the Liberty 2 Pro outdoors, so instead, I've been giving them a test around the house for the past few weeks. That means usually sitting at my desk or pottering around the house doing the household chores. I'm going to start with the TLDR. Or should that be TLDW? Too long didn't watch. Anyway, the Liberty 2 Pro are definitely a very bass-focused and casual-sounding earphone with decent battery life and a good fit and features. And if that sounds like your bag, then make sure you keep watching. Now, there's a lot to go through with these, so let's just get on with it. So first up, just take a look at what's in the box, and like most Anker products, the Liberty 2 Pro comes in a rather nice packaging. The box is extremely stiff and lined with a dense protective material, and it seems like Anker has taken a leaf out of Apple's book in providing solid packaging that goes above and beyond in terms of protection. Inside you'll find the earphones themselves along with a case, a USB-C charging cable, 7 different pairs of silicone tips and 3 different pairs of wing hooks, and of course the documentation. And you're also going to be getting an 18-month warranty and lifetime technical support. Extra points for the little pull tabs that make it a breeze to pull the items out of the box, and also the little card that holds the spare tips and wings is a really nice touch. Each earpiece is quite light at 7 grams per ear without tips or wings, and they stay in place in my ears really well. However, they are rather bulky and they look a little bit like an old school Bluetooth headset. If you want something a little bit more discreet looking, this isn't it, but at least they have a rather understated and clean look rather than a loud or blingy design. So let's just quickly go over the specs. They use Bluetooth version 5, and the codecs they support are SBC, AAC, and aptX, so that's all the most important bases covered. It would have been nice to see aptX HD or LDAC, but honestly, for this kind of earphone, these codecs have all the bases covered, so no real complaints there. In terms of audio sync, I don't have an iPhone, so I couldn't test that, but I did notice a little bit of lag for audio sync with video when watching Netflix on my PC. That would be over aptX. However, the audio seemed to be perfectly in sync when watching Netflix and YouTube from my Android phone. That's also using aptX. Playtime is claimed to be about 8 hours on a single charge, and that seems about right from my testing, although battery life is obviously going to be very dependent on volume and the type of content that you're playing. But it seems pretty decent, if a bit average these days. You also get a further 3 charges from the case for up to 32 hours total, and a 10-minute charge in the case will get you up to 2 hours of playback. The Liberty 2 Pro uses a single dynamic driver and a single Knowles balanced armature per earpiece, and these 2 driver types have been integrated into a single unit, something Anker calls Astria Coaxial Acoustic Architecture. That's a bit of a mouthful. Looking at the diagram, it seems like the dynamic driver is rearward facing and the balanced armature is forward facing. I found it difficult to find the water resistance rating, but it is apparently IPX4, which is resistance against splashes, so these should be okay for light rain and sweat. But these are not designed specifically as sports earphones, however, so don't go expecting them to be as water resistant or sweat proof as the sporty earphones that are out there. The charging case seems like a really nice and compact shape, kind of like a little pebble. It's a good shape that fits nicely in the hand or a pocket and has a soft touch plastic finish. Having said that, I've seen pictures online comparing the size with others such as the AirPods case, and the Liberty 2 Pro case does look to be a little bit bulkier than those. Still, it feels okay to me. The case has a very clean design. To the rear there's a pairing button and also a USB-C charging port that is protected with a dust cover. However, this case supports Qi wireless charging. They don't actually come with a wireless charger, but Anker would be more than willing to sell you one of their charging pads, such as the one I have here. You just drop the case onto the pad and let it do its thing. The case is opened up by sliding the lid upwards, and the earpieces themselves are led down inside the case, which should allow more room for larger tips. Now, once paired to your device, sliding the case open will automatically connect the earpieces to your device before you have even removed them, which I think is a nice feature. And with regards to pairing, when you first open the case, they will automatically be in pairing mode and ready to connect. In your device, you'll see two listings, Soundcore Liberty 2 Pro and Soundcore Liberty 2 Pro L, for individual pairing to both earpieces. In normal operation, the primary earpiece connects to your device and then shares that connection with the secondary earpiece. So the Liberty 2 Pro can be used in a single ear mode, but switching to this mode is a little bit laborious due to the fact that both earpieces automatically pair to the player when the case is opened. To switch to single ear mode, you need to remove both earpieces from the case and then hold down the button on the one that you don't want to use until it turns off. You can then place that one back in the case and continue to use the other one in single ear mode. Single ear mode is a good feature to have, especially for runners who might want to keep one ear free for awareness, for example. Unfortunately, the Liberty 2 Pro seems to be missing a feature that I would be expecting from a device like this in 2020, and that is multi-device connectivity, which would allow seamless switching between devices. I know that Anker has this feature on certain other lower-end devices, so it is odd to see this missing from the Liberty 2 Pro. Is it a deal breaker? Perhaps not. This is a feature that is missing from a lot of earphones and headphones, but as a fussy nerd, it's just something that I expect to see in 2020. I'll now play you a sample of the call quality using the Liberty 2 Pro.
So the Soundcore Liberty 2 Pro has 4 different microphones and uses Qualcomm's CVC-H noise cancelling technology, which should help to remove background noise. And I haven't really had any chance to use these outside in anger what's going on at the moment, but this is the audio from the Soundcores now, and I'll let you decide how it sounds.
Both earpieces have a single push button for controls at the top. This is a good implementation and better than a button on the outside, as it allows easy access to the button without you having to push against the earpiece and into your ear. The buttons control the usual play, pause, answer calls and change volume with either a single tap, a hold or a double tap. Each of these options can be reconfigured in the Soundcore app. Speaking of the Soundcore app, with it you're able to customize the controls on the earphones to perform your preferred action. Firmware updates are also applied using this app, but the most interesting feature in this app is the equalizer. You're able to select from a default sound signature as well as from a number of EQ profiles created by Grammy-winning audio producers, and this is all part of Anker's marketing for the Liberty 2 Pro, along with claims of in-ear studio performance. Most of this seems like a bit of a gimmick, but perhaps some people may find one of these profiles to their taste. The most exciting parts of the app are the custom EQ feature, allowing you to tweak the profile to your own taste, as well as the Hear ID personalization feature. The Hear ID system works similarly to the Neutralizer app that is available for Android. You're instructed to listen in a quiet environment to a series of tones at different frequencies. You hold a button until you can no longer hear that tone, and then the app then builds an EQ profile that suits your own hearing. In the past, I found the Neutralizer app to be remarkably effective, although Soundcore's Hear ID implementation of this idea isn't quite as effective. I do prefer the sound of the Liberty 2 Pro after customization than with the default profile. So how do they sound? Well, as I previously mentioned, this is a very bassy earphone, and I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but if you are a bass head, I think you're probably really going to like these. And before we go too deep into the sound section, from what I've read online, I'm certain that I'm going to get a few questions about background hiss. Is there any, and how noticeable is it? Now, some reviewers have said that early run units had a distractingly loud background hiss, and I never really noticed this at all, and whether that is because Anker has rectified the issue or not, I cannot say. However, if I listen very closely, there is a small, and I emphasize small, amount of background hiss that starts maybe a second before the track starts and remains for maybe a second or so after the track finishes. It is certainly never loud enough that it intrudes during actual audio playback, although if you listen to audio with lots of quiet passages such as audiobooks, then maybe it might be more noticeable for you. But this is something I have experienced on most older Bluetooth earphones that I've tried in the past. However, I don't actually have an awful lot of experience with other TWS earphones, So I'm unable to say how common this is with TWS in general and how this compares with the competition. So therefore, I'm just going to say this. On this unit I have here, it is there if you listen for it, but it's generally not loud enough to intrude or become a distraction. So do with that what you will. Okay, with that said, how they really sound depends on whether or not you're going to use the app. And I think in this case, the app is the real killer feature of the Liberty 2 Pro, as it allows you to customize the sound signature to your taste. And I would say that this app is absolutely necessary. And whether you pick one of the producer profiles, whether you use Here ID, customization, or build your own EQ, I think that the default profile can certainly be improved upon with this app. Now, I know that this reliance on an app is going to be a deal breaker for some people, and that's fine. It just seems like this is Anker's intended use for these earphones. Now, out of the box, the default sound sig is very much the mainstream big bass casual sound signature that you might expect from a high street or big name fashion brand. That means they're going to be rather enjoyable, casual experience that should appeal to a lot of people. In terms of technical performance, they're actually not too bad, but you would never really know it with that default EQ profile. This is definitely a very V-shaped sound signature with a huge bass boost, fairly scooped mids, and an equally boosted upper mids and treble. Despite this, they don't sound harsh in the treble, and they're not overly shouty in the upper mids. These elevated upper frequencies are perhaps more than offset by that huge bass boost. And surprisingly, the low end is not quite as muddy as you would expect, because most of that energy is in the low and sub bass areas. There's no boost in the mid bass. In fact, if anything, there's a little bit of a cut there. Bass is able to reach a much higher level than the Blon BL-03, for example, but the BL-03 has a bit more of that mid bass. In terms of technical performance, their detail retrieval is heavily dependent on the EQ, but once you get that EQ dialed in right, they have a surprisingly decent level of detail hidden underneath. Yeah, it's not up to the same level as the TIN T4 or the Moondrop Starfield, of course, but for a casual earphone, they do hold their own. And yes, I do have a review of the Starfield coming up soon, so keep your eyes open for that. They also have a certain level of urgency and energy, as well as being decently punchy, although they don't quite have the biggest slam ability. There is also no sign of harshness or edginess in the upper frequencies, and they come across as really quite smooth. So while these don't have a particularly audiophile sound, if a casual big bass V-shaped sound signature is what you're looking for, then the Liberty 2 Pro is pretty spot on. For example, these were absolutely perfect for hip-hop and big bass EDM. For example, Bugging Out from the Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest, and I was really getting all the bass I could possibly want for this track, and perhaps a little bit more. This is big bass energy with plenty of that sub-bass rumble, minus the sound of the windows rattling and that thump in the chest, of course. And the same goes for Deep Jungle Walk by Asterix, which has a massive bass line, and the Liberty 2 Pro do this a great justice. Bass heads can stop searching now. This is it, seriously. If hip-hop and big bass EDM is your bag, these are pretty awesome. These might be the bassiest earphones, or headphones for that matter, that I've ever heard. And as just a part-time bass head myself, I do find that these are a little bit much for my taste, but I can imagine some people will absolutely love these. And speaking of Deep Jungle Walk, this also has some really nice sigh elements that move across from the left and the right channels, and on some headphones with poorer imaging, this can sound like it almost jumps between ears, but on earphones that image well, you can track those sounds moving across from one side to the other. The Liberty 2 Pro did pretty well for this. However, in terms of staging, it is a little bit intimate. The Soundcore Liberty 2 Pro don't have active noise cancellation, but actually passive noise isolation is pretty good, so those wanting to shut out the world, these pretty much have you covered. Switching over to my personalized Here ID profile, and things get a lot more balanced. It's still a fairly bass-heavy and V-shaped sound signature, but it's a definite improvement for other genres. This could be a good feature, and it's definitely worth playing around with the various settings for Here ID, but I think a lot of people might be more interested in the custom EQ profile. I ended up pulling down the bass and the treble to even out the frequency response a bit, and I was able to get closer to a signature that was a lot more versatile. But the problem is that even then, it's still a fairly bass-heavy sound. I don't think that it's possible to get a truly neutral sound signature from these earphones, even with EQ. Even when pulling down the bass all the way down to -6 dB, which is as far as the equalizer will allow, it's still a rather boosted sound. I checked out Chronicle's graphs for these, and it looks like they have a good 10 dB up from the tin T4 at 30 to 40 Hz by default. That's a lot of bass. So with that in mind and setting our expectations for this sound signature, these are very much a bass earphone, more suited to modern genres like pop, R&B, hip-hop and EDM, and less so for classic rock, blues, jazz and classical. Having said that, with my custom EQ profile, I did find tracks like Hotel California to be casually enjoyable with a certain musicality that's not tainted by any mid-bass bloat, but sure, the bass is boosted way beyond what would be ideal for this track. But I did find the lead guitar to cut through nicely without being harsh, and they do manage to sound fairly smooth without any edginess. I also found them to be acceptable for a bit of jazz with the right EQ settings. I was able to get the sax sounding decently forwards without being shrill, and the bass down as far as I could to clear up the mix a bit, but it's never going to sound accurate on the Liberty 2 Pro. From a purist perspective, they just won't cut the mustard. But all in, for a casual bass-focused earphone, they do a rather good job. There's lots of fun bass, plenty of upper frequency energy without being harsh and shouty, and I've said before that I prefer a much more casual sound signature for my walking around music, and actually, I really like these for that casual kind of use. And there's a lot to be said for the convenience factor of TWS earphones. Throw them in a pocket, carry them with you everywhere, no messing around with the wires, and I can really see myself reaching for these frequently for trips to the shop or when working out. I should say that I don't have all that much experience with other true wireless earphones, so I can't really do a proper breakdown against the competition, so all I can really do is tell you how I feel about these and talk about their sound versus wired IEMs as I have been doing. And also, due to the way that these have been designed with EQ in mind, it is a little bit difficult to properly compare their sound. Having said that, regardless of the EQ, these are always going to be a fun and V-shaped sounding earphone. There's just no way to EQ the bass down far enough for this not to be the case. Regardless of all of the fun V-shaped earphones I've tried to date, these are the most fun for sure. But the biggest issue I find with the Liberty 2 Pro is actually value. Currently on Amazon you can pick up the Liberty 2 Pro for around £140, and whilst they are a little bit cheaper than the AirPods Pro, the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus are going for £125, and the Sony WF-1000 XM3 for £166. So I'm not quite sure if they're priced quite right considering how competitive this price point is. I think in terms of feature set, they are a little bit outgunned at this price, but I'll leave you to decide that, and I expect that that decision is going to hinge on how much you like bass. Slap like now if you like bass. In summary, whilst the pricing is a little bit odd, there's still a lot to like about the Liberty 2 Pro. If you're looking for a smooth and fun sounding earphone with big bass and true wireless convenience, the Soundcore Liberty 2 Pro should certainly be on your radar. Okay, well I think that's it. Was there anything I left out? There's so much to cover with Bluetooth devices, so leave your comments below if I missed anything out. And if you like this video, then don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't already, then please consider subscribing. And thank you so much to Anker for sending these over for me to check out. Thank you so much to the patrons, and if you want to support the channel, then check the links down in the description. You can also support the channel by commenting, liking and sharing. It all helps me out more than you'd think. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.